All right, I am calling to order a meeting of the Strategic Planning Committee on Thursday, April 6, 2017 at 7:03 in the auditorium at City Hall. And I will take the roll. Alderwoman Melizzi Golia, I'm present. Alderman Shoneman.
Here.
And Alderman Shoneman is here representing infrastructure. Alderman Dowd called me and he is not feeling well. Kim Kleiner
Here.
from the mayor's office. Commissioner Matthew LaPlante from Police Commission is not here. Commissioner Paul Garant from Fire.
Here.
Commissioner Joel Ackerman from the Board of Public Works.
Here.
Thank you. And Mr. Robert Scheffel from the Airport Authority.
Here.
Thank you. So thank you all, especially those of you who are alternates, for being here tonight. So we have a quorum. Mr. Hollowell from the Board of Ed contacted me, and neither he or an alternate from the Board of Ed were able to attend. Alderman McCarthy, who has been joining us, is unable to attend this evening, and Director Marchant from Community Development, who is typically here at our meetings, had a conflict this evening and notified me she would not be here. And we also have Director Cummings from Economic Development, and we are to thank him for all of his hard work dealing with all of our sticky notes and all of our rankings and putting that together for us. So public comment, seeing no members of the public here. Communication, we have none. So we are going to continue our discussion. All of you, I believe, received either directly or through the assigned member of this committee, you received a copy of the 14 categories that we had identified as major kind of overarching areas. And within those categories, looking down in the columns, you see a variety of items. These are the results of the Post-it note activity we had 2 weeks ago, where we identified things that we thought needed to be considered and were important in moving forward with identifying priorities for the city. And as those Post-it notes went up on the boards, which are here for you to look at tonight, good evening, Commissioner. That's okay, Commissioner LaPlante has joined us. Thank you. And I have a name tag. Here, just move it right here.
Thanks.
And there you go.
Perfect, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's all set, thank you. So we took the Post-it notes, and after they were put up on the boards, we rearranged them and then gave them the titles that you see heading the columns across that page that you received initially to do the rankings. When we met at our last meeting, we had hoped to take these topics and rank them in order of importance. We were unable to do that because we didn't have a quorum, so you did that within your committee or board or commission. And so this evening, Director Cummings has given us a handout that has a copy of the strategic planning matrix, and he's given us the rankings. So as they are, and he's identified who they came from and where these items were placed. So Director Cummings, could you review this for us? And
yes, absolutely, I'm happy to.
Especially for people who are watching.
Again, Madam Chair, Tim Cummings, Director of Economic Development. What you have before you and also what is on the screen is essentially a summary of the prioritization of those who've responded. I will note that we are missing a few responses, and some of the responses that we did receive, not all categories were ranked, and so with those qualifiers being in place, just keep that in the back of your mind that this, I don't know how you'd like to handle that, because this is incomplete data, and that's probably a discussion point for us to have at some point this evening. But nonetheless, just to walk you through this summary, you'll see in front of you that 5 differing community stakeholders have responded, and they have, as you can see, going from left to right, we've ranked the differing columns, and it's averaged on the bottom as to what the score is that they received within the column. It should be noted that the lower the score, the higher the priority, so that's a little counterintuitive, so I just want to call that out to you. But otherwise, that's pretty much where we are to date. I will note that I think economic development is trending pretty high on the list.
Convenient.
Which I like. And then, as you can see, it's education, public safety, long-term planning seems to be doing very well, along with infrastructure. So that's a very quick overview for you. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay, you know what, Alderman Dowd sent us the rankings from budget this evening. That's what I was just looking at, about 10 of 6 this evening. They were sent attached to an email that he sent. And so there's where I can just tell you, number 1 was public safety, 2 is education, 3 was long-term financial planning, 4 was economic development, 5 complete streets, and 6 was efficiencies. So, and I won't go through the rest of them, but just to give you a sense of like their top almost 50% there. So I think you're copied on that, Director Cummings, so.
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but it came in probably like at dinner time. I got it at 10 of 6, so you may not have, you obviously didn't have a chance to see it. Do you want me to put those in? Do you want me to give them to you?
Yeah, we can put them in. It may help the conversation.
Okay.
If you bear with me. It will take 10 seconds.
And if you give me the column name, I can give you the number, because his are in alphabetical order. I think it'll be easier to go. So this is budget.
And we have education.
Education 2.
2. And public safety.
Public safety was 1.
Long-term financial planning.
3.
Efficiency.
Efficiencies was 6.
HR labor.
7.
Library.
Library was 11.
Natural resources.
13.
Complete streets.
5.
5. Land use.
Land use was 8.
Economic development.
4.
Ooh. Right-of-way and infrastructure.
Right-of-way and infrastructure 10.
Public transportation.
Public transportation was 12.
Downtown.
Downtown was 9.
And then city arts and culture.
City arts was 14. And then he just had a comment here, the committee found it hard to rank after 5 because the entire list is important. And then noticing that some of the higher rankings drive some of the lower rankings, safety, education, long-term financial planning, were viewed as key factors across the board.
With that being said, Madam Chair, adding the budget comments in, I believe I used the formula, and you should have saw that the averages were adjusted accordingly.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And I thought we had received something from DPW.
So you are correct, but what you was received was actually not a ranking. It was similar to what Fire also responded
Okay.
as well, but it wasn't categorized in
Okay.
with rankings. So
Okay. All right, thank you, thank you. Okay, so, before we address this, I know Commissioner Grant was talking, and there were some items that Fire had. Would you like to share those with the committee, and maybe we can talk about where we might see those things under these larger categories?
I responded with three priorities for the fire department. And I responded that they were immediate, short-term, medium-term, and long-term. And the first one, you're gonna have to, is the continuation of the construction of the bay at Spitbrook Road. We've received, obviously, the planning board approval, and we're moving along with that, and we'll start, I assume, breaking ground very soon.
if I may.
Sure, absolutely.
So I just want to clarify, because I think there may be some confusion here. There's essentially two different exercises happening. So the first exercise, what Commissioner Grant is referring to, was Fire, DPW, along with a lot of the other folks around this table, came to one of the meetings with goals pre-prepared, as just articulated. And we've set those issues and items aside temporarily, because then at the meeting, I believe, if my memory is correct, we started to endeavor through a differing exercise, which was referred to as an infinity exercise, or an infinity diagram, where the group as a whole articulated priorities or goals, and then they were categorized, and then it was asked of us to go back to our respective groups and rank those categories as what's most important. I point this out because that's a completely separate endeavor than what I believe was initially asked, and I can only suspect that as we continue down the path, we'll then fold in as objectives the items that were brought to the last meeting.
Right.
Again, I apologize because I'm one meeting behind. I was not
I
here when you
understand.
did those, and that would have eased the process. But the second item on the list, which is a little further out, which in our mind, it's in the fiscal 2020 timeframe, and has to do with better utilization of the money that's existing in SURF for replacement of, essentially, there's really four pieces of apparatus. Two that are related with hazmat. One is the dive truck, and the other is the what we call the air supply truck, which responds on a second alarm to bring compressor and spare bottles. We would like at some point to eliminate all those four trucks and replace them with a heavy rescue, which would contain compressor and bottles, dive team activities, the equipment, and the command post for hazmat. So that's part of our future lookout. It would eliminate a lot of maintenance, because we'd only have to maintain one truck. It'd eliminate a lot of tire purchases, because we wouldn't be fitting tires on vehicles. So that was the second one. The third one has that outlook of doing what's necessary within the city, and may involve other functions, to allow us to move from an ISO 2 rated community to an ISO 1 rated community, which has the effect of reducing the cost of insurance on commercial. That includes apartment complexes and industrial facilities. So by raising our ISO compliance number, we return efficiencies to the community directly.
Right. And I think at the meeting you weren't at, we discussed as Commissioner Cummings was referencing, where some of those might fit, and specifically to the ISO rating, how that would really fit into economic development by reducing taxes
Yes.
because of your ISO rating improving. So that would be something that we would directly see incorporated here. So I wanted people, because we do have some new people here, just to have a sense of what we're talking about. But to Director Cummings' point, we're really looking at these bigger areas and not looking specifically at projects. But what are these bigger areas that we need to identify? And then, as he stated, some of these projects would then rise to the top once we identify our key areas. So,
Do we at some point begin to move in the departmental goal into, for example, efficiency or public safety?
at some point, this is it. Depending upon what we adopt, we're going to be looking at the departments saying, these are the city priorities in terms of planning and moving forward. These are the things we need to be looking at in terms of budgeting. And then the departments will say, okay, so how do our goals move in? That work will not necessarily be done around this table. We'll be working at that higher umbrella level. But I would certainly think it would then drive what you're
Okay,
looking
thank
at.
you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other comments? Director Cummings, I didn't want to,
Nope, I'm good.
okay. Alderman Shoneman.
Thank you. Can I just ask Director Cummings, can you see that better than I can? What are those new averages on the bottom line there?
Absolutely, I'll read them across. And I did print out for you all what is up before you. So,
Oh, the new one?
Just changed it as a result of the.
oh, yeah,
That's what I
true.
want. I want the new
apologize.
one, if you can.
Across the bottom, education, 4.0. Public safety, 3.0. Long-term financial planning, 4.0. Efficiency, 6.3. HR labor, 8.0. Library, 10.5. Natural resources, 10.6. Complete streets, 6.4. Land use, 8.2. Economic development, 2.5. Right-of-way infrastructure, 5.0. Public transportation, 10.3. Downtown, 5.5. City arts and culture, 9.8.
And once again, a reminder that the lower score, the higher the priority. I don't know, well, first, any thoughts, reflections on this, Commissioner Plant? I know I heard you start to say something.
No, I just want to say, yes, sure, that I didn't rate some of these just because they get to be shades of a difference. So I thought it would contribute more to just stick on some, and I see that I missed the safety one, oddly enough.
We won't
but-
tell.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So I just thought that as you got down, I mean, I think if you drive some of these, driving the downtown and driving some of it, the other stuff falls into place. So that's kind of how I was thinking about it. And that's why some of the others I didn't rate, just because I went back and forth on it 6 times. You know, move that one here, this one there. Because I think with the downtown, if you have one driving it and you enhance the downtown, and the reason I was late is I came from your guys' presentation on the traffic, and that seems to flow into that downtown thing, where if you improve the traffic and,
Oh, this mic.
sorry about that. So the downtown thing seems to fit well with what he's doing, and if you can do that, then the other stuff seems to fall into place. So that's why, it's kind of how I was thinking about it.
Any other thoughts, comments? I will just say that, like Commissioner Plant, PEDC chose not to rate some of these, and specifically, we ended up folding education, and education into economic development, along with complete streets. Or no, I'm sorry, education got folded into economic development. Complete streets got folded into right-of-way and infrastructure. And I believe that's where we also put public transportation. So I don't know if, now that we've looked at these, if we do, oh, and I know we had talked about the library piece, and just for those of you who are new and haven't had a chance to read the minutes or whatever, the library piece, if you look at the original copy with all the columns and all of the information on it, talked about maintaining a level of technology. I just, so you know what you're looking at on that, the library did not come up with that. That was something that came from another member of the group. The library's goals that came from actually the Library Board of Trustees were really related to improve public transportation downtown, getting people downtown, and they were very much focused towards developing downtown and ways for people to get downtown, to access them. So I just, and again, also to the education column with those items, they were not developed by members of the Board of Ed and brought here. They were things that came from the other members of this committee. So I don't know if we want to look at some of these and think about, do we want to combine some of them, and do we kind of see some of them as being a bigger umbrella for some of the other ones? Commissioner LaPlante?
Or could we scratch some that are low and then re-tally numbers, look at them with a reduced number and say pick, prioritize these?
And we could, the one thing I don't want to lose is like the richness of what's
All
there.
done.
And so, things like complete streets to infrastructure would be something that they might be looking at as they move forward. So is there something here that we can at least hold on to but put into a bigger umbrella? Yes, Kim, and then Alderman Schellner.
So I think we did the same in the mayor's office, where you see that complete streets is a 5 and right-of-way and infrastructure is a 5, because we really saw those as the same. The same with economic development and downtown. We rated them both a 1 because we really see those fitting in together as
Okay. Alderman Schellner.
Yes, thank you. I just will share a perspective from Infrastructure Committee, since we're kind of sharing
Yeah,
what our different
please.
departments thought. We ranked everything with a different number. We didn't have co-number ones or anything like that to establish an actual ranking. And things like you spoke about complete streets, for instance, and I was talking with Alderman Cookson about this. We have it as a lower number than infrastructure. I think that it is definitely part of infrastructure. And as we were looking at some of these things that were further down the list, like complete streets or downtown, not that those things aren't considered important, but some things that we can do might be a little easier. And I think that complete streets, even though we saw that as a lower rank, if it's about walkability and biking, those kinds of things, that could be easily accomplished in the short term. And if we have these different columns here as 14 different areas to focus on, it'd be nice as we went through time over the next year or two to realize, okay, we knocked a couple of them off the list. Not because we didn't do them, but because we got them accomplished.
Right.
And the ones that are easy, we can accomplish those. Even though it's a lower number, it might be done sooner because it's easier. And then while something like public safety and financial and economic development, those kinds of things could be a longer term that would require, be a higher priority, but would take more time, and we're going to get them started now. They'll take longer to get done, but the other things that are further down the list, we might, even though they're further down the list, might get at them and get them done quickly, and then we can say, we used to have 14, now we're down to only 10 because we
Okay.
finished 5.
So you're kind of looking the perspective was some of these things could be projects in their own right rather than overriding focuses for looking at strategic planning citywide and driving budget.
I guess that's what I'm saying.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right,
thank
no,
you.
that's-
That's a good summary. Yeah,
Okay.
some of them are project-based, and you're absolutely right. I think when I think about complete streets, I know it's a broad plan, and it's something that I think we need to work on. I think it does a lot to improve the attractiveness of the city. Same with downtown, a lot of things we can do to improve the attractiveness. We got the email not too long ago about, well, I guess that's to do with natural resources, the rivers and all that kind of thing. We can begin to see some of these things as projects that have a budgetary aspect associated with them, but something we can have a beginning, process through, and an end, and
Okay.
finished and accomplished.
Other thoughts? Commissioner Durant?
As I look over at Tim, I consider his role in attracting business and industry to the community. I see a lot of these things as really interrelated and necessary to accomplish. For instance, if we look at downtown, well, certainly a walkable bike plan and walkability of the downtown could be very important in attracting individual companies. Ensuring the safety of the downtown area is a public safety aspect that rolls into this. I think there needs to be some compression of these 14 categories by picking and choosing certain ones to reline them out in terms of my downtown. What are the pieces that we need to fit together in downtown to drive a goal of, I'm sure one of the key goals is bringing more business and industry to the community. How are we going to do that? That's just a piece that I'm looking at.
Anyone? Yeah, Alderman Sherman.
I can't answer the question for Director Cummings, but I think what's interesting as we look at this is how clearly economic development popped to the top. I think that it seems that there's strong consensus that Nashua needs something to build its base, build its tax base, build business, create jobs, all these kinds of things that are critical to us. And economic development looks like it would drive the strategic planning matrix. And so now it's up to Tim.
No pressure,
It's all
Tim.
yours now.
Awesome.
So I just want to address the thoughts about downtown, because we discussed this in planning and economic development, and Alderman McCarthy, as well as everyone else on planning and economic development, went back and forth with, where is it, and that fact that everything on here probably, there's a part of it that dovetails with downtown. And planning and economic development rated that as one of our top 4 or 5, whatever we ended up rating, for. We rated it as separate from economic development, with the view that what we do downtown downtown's almost an entity of itself, and that some of the things we need to do downtown really need to be just downtown, and that we have to have a plan for that. And it's not to say there isn't economic development and that there isn't complete streets or public safety, but that the way it goes down together for downtown in terms of looking at balancing the commercial development along with the residential development and creating that environment is something that we all ended up agreeing on should be just a separate category unto itself. When I looked at it, I thought, well, downtown could, and I agree with you, could totally be spread across all of these areas. But as we looked at it and talked about, what are the needs downtown, and that we really need to have kind of a plan just for downtown. And so that's why we ended up giving it its own rating. Just some of our thought about that. But certainly, economic development was either number 1 or 2. We just kind of started going through this list. And when we looked at economic development, one of the things we tucked into economic development was it was education, because when you look at education, there are a number of items there that talk about workforce education, retraining people, and that it wasn't really about the public schools. It was about education in a much bigger picture, and understanding that there are people who need specialized training as adults, or they need retraining, and that should be a focus of what we're doing. And Director Cummings, help me out. When we went to NRPC's legislative, now, were you there?
I didn't make
You, yeah. They had the Economic Development Director from where, Rochester?
Rochester, yeah.
Rochester, New Hampshire, and she was talking about a company that came in. There was an existing company, it had grown, it was purchased by, or entered into a partnership with a French company, and they were getting ready to double their footprint from what she showed us. And they needed a very specialized workforce. And so they actually went to their community college and said, this is what we need. And they set up the coursework needed to train that workforce. So I think, that's kind of that economic development piece of education. This is what we need, and who do we go to provide that training to then support what's going on? Because they were looking at training a workforce for 20 years. They were looking to train out to have a workforce available to them for 20 years, which is, in the day of 3-year and 5-year plans, 20 years is a long time to be thinking out. But, so I think that, from that's kind of part of our thinking, that was PEDC's thinking around education being rolled into economic development. So I don't know if anyone has other thoughts. Alderman Schoeneman. And you know what, please just jump in. If you haven't spoken and I don't recognize you, just say your name so the person transcribing at least can say, okay, that's a new voice. But just jump in.
Okay, great, thanks. If the economic development piece is what's gonna drive everything, then everything else would play a supporting role to that, I think. And if we were to look at them isolated from each other, I think we'd be doing it incorrectly. So whatever we do in these other areas, as we make decisions in our departments, we should be asking ourselves, what does that do for my number one goal? And that just sounds like it's the main thing we got to focus on. And as we develop the strategic planning matrix, it's not just about how we allocate budgets, but it's about how we make decisions. It should
right,
guide,
exactly.
it should guide our process.
Right, exactly. And I think that when we first met, and I know the PowerPoint presentation from our first meeting is available because it was attached to the minutes, but when we first met, we talked about, and we went back to a page that kind of had this flow chart about strategic planning, really starting with looking at what are those, like, maybe 3 or 4 big things that you're going to use to guide how you go through and make decisions about allocating resources, be they human resources, financial resources, but what are the things, what are your targets going to be, what are your goals going to be, that, as you said, every time we come back and say, okay, these are the things we're looking at, and how is this driving that?
A big part of that, too, would be measurability on those things. Because accountability is key, too. If we want to set a goal and move towards it, and then we make a recommendation, we should be able to track how successful was that?
Right.
Do we continue that, or do we need to fix it
Right.
to get us there?
And I think that will naturally occur once we identify what are those areas that we're gonna make our priorities for the next 3 years, 5 years, whatever, move forward, and how are we going to measure them? And as you said, we may need to come back and tweak them and respond to the reality of the environment we live in. Any other thoughts? No? Yeah.
Madam Chair, thank you. Joel Ackerman, Board of Public Works.
I think this is great. I would have thought this is something we've been doing as a city for a long time now, maybe not, maybe yes. What's the time frame that, as we roll out this matrix here, that the plan of action is to present it to the mayor and to the other key stakeholders or department heads throughout the city, so that we can get their buy-in? This is the strategic matrix, the goals of the city, so that they can, as Alderman Shoneman had explained, create their goals as part of their budget, so that they can align them to the strategy of the city.
Right.
What's the timeframe of that?
We-
Was that part of that first presentation?
We, I had originally set up meetings till May, trying to lock in some dates before budget season began, recognizing that once budget season hits, it will be harder to get dates. Our thought was, when Director Cummings, Director Marchant, and I talked, was that we would try to get this down into, again, what we thought were maybe the 3 to 5 priorities, with what that meant, and with statements about each of them and examples. And I believe Commissioner LaPlante, you were part of that, one of those meetings where we talked about having statements about each category and then some bullet points underneath. That's rolling that out to the public, as well as taking it back to the Board of Aldermen, and all of you taking that back to your groups within the city and getting some feedback. And then finally coming up with a plan to go to the Board of Aldermen. I am envisioning now that, I would like to say we'll have it done by the end of June. I'm not so sure. And we're just gonna see how this moves. But we don't want this to hang around for a long time. We wanna put it together, get it out there, get feedback, and be able to bring it back to the Board of Aldermen.
Right. No, absolutely. I just wanted
Yeah.
to understand it, get a baseline.
No,
as
this
to what
isn't
the
meant to be a
ultimate-
2-year project.
No, this is great. This is wonderful, and I do agree that, the goals should be measurable, and so we can, rate how we achieved it over the next 2 or 3, 4 or 5 years.
Thanks.
Kim Kleiner. So I'm trying to understand, once you've identified your top 3 or 5 or whatever it is that you choose, exactly how you're going to work into those objectives, what the individual boards have said their objectives are. And I'll use education as an example. Education, when the mayor's office is looking at it, may be very different from what education, when the Board of Education is looking at it. So the Board of Education has publicly said that their top goal is making sure that every child reads and computes at grade level by grade 3. They've said that's their focus and how they're moving forward. But when we look at it, although we agree that is an important goal, we also look at things like our CTE programs and making sure that those are working efficiently to develop the workforce development that does wrap into economic development. So are we going to really state as objectives quite a few different under each category, or are we going to then decide as a group which objectives we feel are most important?
In our last discussion, and Commissioner, Director Cummings, I know, I wonder how the mics are picking that up, and Commissioner Plant chime in. We had, at PEDC, first I will say, we talked about DOE education as one part of course, this bigger thing. But looking at that is really an economic development driver. So, I mean, even the fact that children are reading at a certain level and doing math at a certain level sets them up for success as they go into high school, which sets them up for success in getting internships and doing work studies and going out in the community and working. So play that out, and it's still impacting economic development, just in terms of the quality of student that we can have working for Parks and Rec, or, you know, working in City Hall, or, you know, whatever, or even working at McDonald's. They have someone who can do math and those sorts of things. So we weren't talking about, in each of these, putting individual department objectives, but very broad sorts of objectives that would be generated. And then it would be up to the individual departments, commissions, the airport authority, to say, okay, these are the 3 priorities, the 5 priorities, whatever. These are the broad objectives under that. What does this mean for us individually? And then taking that citywide strategic plan, what does it look like for them as they address that?
Think.
Yeah.
I'd like to add to that. I think it's a very good point about the different types of education, the CTE portion and the reading portion at grade 3. One's long-term, one's a little more immediate. I think about that Rochester example. They went to the community college and said, this is our immediate need. We need people who can operate these machines. They didn't go to the elementary school and said, we need kids who can add better. So if we're going to look at economic development, especially because I think part of this, we should have short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals. If we're going to have a short-term goal of getting business here and being able to provide them with a workforce, then CTE becomes a very high priority. And I think it's important if we're going to establish something, I think we should get public buy-in too.
Absolutely.
At some stage, so that everyone's on board. If we're going to establish economic development as a goal, and we understand that education or public safety, whatever it is, contributes to that, recognizing there could be different aspects of that, I would hope that within those departments, they would too set the same priority, so that within education, just for instance, CTE would be higher than math, knowing that you have to have those core things. But our focus in that example should be, what are we going to do to get this workforce ready to go right away? And then train up the new kids coming through so that they're prepared to enter that program, you know, that technical program or the business program, whatever it happens to be. So as we let departments do it, I think we need to get everyone on board so that the understanding is that the immediate goal is this, the longer-term goal is this, and not try to make something that we really want to do, you know, make it fit
Right.
the big goal. It should logically and objectively fit that
Right.
big goal. That's a good example.
Yeah.
So just to take that a little further, it is important then that we as a community, and all of our boards, really buy into those goals. Because you may be asking, and I'm just using this as an example, the Board of Education to change their focus a little bit more if we've identified economic development as number 1. You know, understand where I'm going here? You know, now we're saying, okay, well, our CT and our workforce development is really important when they're focusing down on these lower grades, and they've said that that's their initiative. So for us to have those discussions would really be important to each of the individual boards.
Right, right. Go ahead.
Bob Scheitel from National Airport. Echoing on the last comment, I think the caution flags are waving here, that we be extremely careful how this is publicized, because I did the rankings, and economic development came out 1, and when I did my rankings, I said none of these will happen if we don't have public safety. So I put it higher up. It came out as number 2. But if this were to be presented to the public without a large dose of clarification, they're going to look at this and say, oh my God, the library came out at 11, and natural resources, those are the parks and recreation that came out at 12. The city is saying that the parks and recreation isn't important. Well, of course the city is saying it's important, but it's not as important as a police officer in a police car being able to respond to a 911 call.
And that has to be part of whatever presentation is made to clarify that we're not saying this one is more important than the other. We're saying they're all important to a specific, to a certain degree. But I don't think anybody would argue that the safety is paramount, because you can't do the other things if the streets aren't safe.
Well,
So-
yeah,
No, go
please
ahead.
continue.
No, I was just gonna say, it's going to require, I don't wanna say good salesmanship, because that sounds like you're trying to sell people on something they don't really want. It needs to, extreme clarity as to what we're saying on this.
Right, and again, in past discussions, that's something that we've talked about, and Kim, I can't remember if you were at the meeting where we had the discussion about, once we identify what our priorities are, having like a statement and then some objectives under it. So it's very, very clear, this is what this is about, and these are some of the highlights related to that. So, and again, the reason why looking at this now, are there things here that we would want to roll into other areas? Natural resources, if you look at that, it talks about the waterfront and capitalizing on that and keeping the parks. So we had a discussion in PEDC about, is that also part of economic development? You know, maintaining the waterfront, doing things on the waterfront. The parks, we certainly use the parks to do things to bring people in. I mean, we have the art show there, so you could say, well, that's part of, you know, arts and bringing in some economic development. It's also recreational, so do we put that under infrastructure? But looking at that, and looking at a number of these, where do we see those going? Do we see city arts and culture under economic development? You know, where, so some of these other things that we've identified, can we start collapsing these and understanding, again, complete streets as a project, probably more appropriately under infrastructure. So we fold that in there, and maybe it becomes part of a, you know, a bigger umbrella, but knowing that it will go forward on its own, but we don't lose sight of it here.
But again, without a considerable amount of clarification, if you put something out that has a title of complete streets, you're going to get people out there saying, you're right, because they need to be paved, I just drove down
Fill
them,
in
they're
those
terrible.
potholes.
But if you look at the criteria here, it's talking about walkability. And that does not necessarily have a priority over paving those streets.
Right, right. And within the city, there is something that's referred to as the Complete Streets Program that comes out of public health, and so if you go to public health, that's there. But you're right, if you don't know about it, you're thinking, oh, a complete street, I have a solid piece of pavement to drive on and a solid piece of pavement to walk on, both of which are level and not cracked.
And I would recommend, like the previous conversation, that these 14, what we're calling them, 14 categories, could be modified realistically, because basically they all feed off of each other to some degree. But there should be some categories, like downtown should be a category. Safety should be a category. Education should be a category. But the others could be in there. For example, efficiency. Well, that should be in everybody's category. I don't know that it necessarily should be a separate category. It was ranked 6th.
Well, and I think that some people from past discussions had the other thing that we make it a category because everyone should have it. So, you know, there's that other, but I don't think anyone thinks it's not important.
No.
It's just, do you see, like, it should be one of the major drivers, so we know that people understand it's a priority. Or do you roll it into
Well,
something else?
efficiency shouldn't be a goal, it should be a standard.
Right, and that's what these, yeah, right. So do we want to roll this in with other things? Alderman Schoenman.
I was just looking at the column that it's headed by efficiency, and talks about metrics for costs of the city services, goal of increased efficiency. That kind of gets to the measurability I think we spoke about a little bit earlier, and that should be part of everything. whatever we do should be measurable in some way, and it should be part of every activity. Regarding things like natural resources, which had to do with parks and complete streets, well, let's take complete streets, for instance. It says walkable bike plan. Well, a walkable bike plan needs bike routes,
Right.
which is infrastructure, and it needs a plan,
Right.
which maybe is specifically part of economic development or community development program. From our standpoint, and I speak for myself and Mark Cookson, Alderman Cookson, and some of the others, I think
On
on
infrastructure.
infrastructure. You know, these are things that we do hear about. We hear presentations on waterways, and we hear presentations on bikeability, that kind of thing. And as the infrastructure committee, I think those are things that we would focus on. And I would suggest, and just for a conversation here, that those kinds of things could be rolled into infrastructure. When I think about my conversation with Alderman Cookson as we were discussing these kinds of things, we shared that viewpoint, because there is the component of bricks and mortar that goes along with that, and that's what we would do. Now, we might not necessarily say, well, let's come up with a bike plan. We might say, well, here's a plan. What do we do to make sure the streets are, bike-friendly, for instance?
But by identifying infrastructure as one of those priorities, what we're saying is economic development's important, infrastructure is important, whatever the other areas are that we identified this evening. And then within that, departments will know that these are things that are priorities. And as we go forward with budgeting and looking at priorities and where do we want to put our focus in budgeting, these are the things that will kind of be there in the broad sense driving us. So do we take all those natural resource goals? Do we take complete streets and put it under right-of-way and infrastructure? I think I would agree with you.
Madam Chair,
Yeah,
I wanted to go back to Kim's conversation.
sure.
Before we get too far away. As I look at the education component, we have the CTE program. Here we have HVAC, electrical, building construction. I think we need to look at, for the development of people ready for economic development to move into these companies, a different level, a different skill set. We need to look to teach people how to do analysis. We need to teach of electronic components. We need to teach them how they're assembled, how they're soldered. That's the new technology. Okay? Yeah, we need the guys to build the building, but we need the economic development is the people who are gonna fit that. How to operate CNC printers, not just CNC lathes, but the 3D printing, and I know they're going after that now. It's a different model, I think, than what we're focused on today. So I think we need to look at that as a resource that helps economic development attract companies.
And I would, Kim and I, as many of you know, both have been on the Board of Ed. And Kim, your experience more recent than mine, so chime in. I don't know if many people know this, but for each of those programs in our public schools in the CTE portion, there is an advisory board for each program. So the cosmetology program has an advisory board. The auto body shop has an advisory board. Every one of those boards, or every one of those programs has a board. The healthcare biology board, I know at one time, actually, many of the people who were on that were from hospitals and universities in the Boston area supporting our program. And their job is to do what you're talking about, saying, okay, this is the type of equipment your students need to know. What you have, we're not going to be using in 3 years. And so that, part of that is there, but do we need to look at supporting that differently or in a better way?
I think when you look at these boards, when you're looking at that STEM group, when they're looking at biological biofarm production or medical device production, there's nobody from industry sitting there. And the industry is where they're going to tell you what we need today. You know, what's coming out of the academia is not going to tell you what industry needs. The people who are making the products,
Yeah, and I don't,
hiring.
and Kim's got more recent experience than I do with those boards.
I mean, our programs are fantastic. And they're very well done, they're very well managed. They are managed by the boards of actual people from the industries. Recently, and I think sometime in February, there was actually a discussion with when the child leaves the CTE program, what happens? The link between the CTE program and the companies or the apprenticeships
It's not existent.
that they need to continue on. Because maybe that isn't necessarily a tech college. Maybe these kids aren't necessarily going to college. How do you link them with that next step? And that's really your workforce. So if you're dropping the ball, so to speak, because they've graduated and they've walked down and gotten their diploma, and they don't know what to do next, then you haven't fully fulfilled the mission. And I know they're having those discussions at the BOE level now, and they're trying to fill that out. That does take relationships and building those relationships, where I think is where economic development can come in. But it also takes manpower, because you've got to have the people that, and the staff within the schools to put those types of programs
One-on-one,
into
right?
place. Yeah, so, I mean, and with that, with staff comes money, and with money, you know where I'm
What
going
does CTE
with
mean?
that. A career technical education.
So vocational.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And several of those programs, I believe, people leave with actual certificates, so they can, like, start at entry-level sorts of positions. I think the cosmetology program, they come out and they can be licensed. The nursing program, they come out with, what, an LPN?
Certified.
or
They
something?
do, they come out
Yeah,
with a
LNA,
certificate,
yeah,
but the even with the cosmetology, they have to go on.
Yeah,
They have to go on
absolutely.
to a program and do more hours and more clinical to sit, in order to sit for their state license. You know, so whether they go to Continental or Michael's in Bedford, I mean, they're going somewhere to learn more, but they do have, if they go into one of those programs, they do have it like almost a third
Right.
done because of the high school credits they've
Right. It's
received.
kind of the equivalent of an AP placement in some of those technology programs, which is good. So I'm wondering if, I don't think we have Post-it notes here, but do we want to
I can go get some.
take,
Before you go
Sure.
down that thought, prior to getting the different groupings minimalized, if you will,
sure,
wouldn't it be wise to get all the input from the missing groups, including fire, schools, and library, and Board of Public Works, so that you're not skewing the data?
well, we have, fire is here. I know it's not recorded there, but Commissioner Grant is here, is speaking, and we've talked about where some of those things go. And so I think Commissioner Grant can represent the commission, because I know I've been at a couple of their meetings where they've talked about this, and his comments are reflective of the whole group. Board of Ed has not been able to attend, and they've not been able to give us, to provide their input. And I totally appreciate your comments, But I do think we need to kind of move forward. When we did this exercise with the Post-its, although we don't have the rankings from DPW of this group, they were involved in the initial part. The only people who really have not been involved in any of putting this information together is the Board of Ed. And I've also not received any information from them. And in talking with people at our last meeting, since we have a quorum, if we could at least do some of this work, and we can always come back and reflect on it, but at least we'll have something to take back to people and further the discussion. I'm reluctant to say, okay, this is great, but we're missing input from a couple of groups, especially knowing some of those people have been involved in other parts of it. And I would rather send it back, so how are people comfortable with that, rather than, I would hate to have us be here tonight and like stop now and not move forward, but I totally appreciate your comment, because it would be nice to have everyone's input. Director and then.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to say, I have updated police a moment ago to reflect some of the changes to incorporate all 14 columns, and I'm in the midst of updating fire to be included in the matrix. So
Okay.
This is changing and evolving along the way. So
Okay, so
if-
then you can give us those new numbers. Yeah, Alderman Shoneman, please.
When Director Cummings is done with that, I'd like to ask a question from his personal experience as he goes out, and imagine you going out and try to sell the city to businesses that might want to come here. What are the things that they look for? Now, I agree with Mr. Scheifel, who spoke earlier about public safety. I don't know that a company coming in would say, our number one thing is public safety, but I think the number one thing needs to be public safety. Some of these things are given, and it may not come up in a conversation, but what are the things that a company coming in, and there's the obvious one, we need workforce. Are some of the things that they're looking for, things that we cannot control right now? What if they want a better business enterprise tax or something like that? We can't control that, but we can maybe lobby for those kinds of things if that's what they're looking for. Or if they need better electric rates. Some of the decisions that are made in Concord might affect that, although we can't necessarily affect it ourselves here. But I'd like to get a sense of what a company coming in, based on your conversations, what they have to say.
Absolutely, if I may, Madam Chair. Speaking to site selectors, commercial, professional, commercial, real estate individuals, the conversation usually centers around, when you're dealing with an innovation-type company, around available workforce, and making sure it's an educated, available workforce to meet the demands that the company has. They spend the most time trying to educate, train, and retain their employees. So having an available resource that can, regarding people that are educated is, particularly with the innovation type of economy, is their number one metric that they use. There's other metrics along the way, depending on the industry. It's very industry specific. Another good example after human capital is infrastructure in the more traditional sense, being water and sewer. And making sure that they have access to the right amount of water, sewer, roads. Those are their number one driving. Access to the highway. Those are their primary drivers during a site selection.
If I can
Sure, please.
continue. Do we have any issues with zoning or anything like that? Are there any hurdles that are abnormal here in Nashua, that more difficult, or are we in good shape on that? with regard to companies wanting to come in?
That's a great question. I wouldn't say you're abnormal. I think Nashua has all the traditional issues that a lot of other communities has, because zoning is, and some people tend to not remember this, it's not a stagnant document. It should be living. It needs to evolve as the marketplace evolves. So, an example, on the Hudson line, that was traditionally a more industrialized area in the city. The market has changed tremendously. You're not gonna see industrial backfill on the east side of Nashua over by the Canal Bridge Street area. That is gonna turn more residential as the neighborhood trends in that direction. So making sure your zoning aligns with the marketplace is very important. Otherwise, you're gonna see stagnation, and you're not gonna see the private market react. And that's typically when blight starts to set in. Now, that is a good example that you'll find that across a lot of communities. Does that answer the question?
It does.
Okay.
It does.
And I think that's one of the items that's on that bigger list, looking at land use and zoning.
If I
Yeah,
may
please.
then. So is the biggest hurdle we have to overcome the educated workforce, would you say?
So if I may, I wouldn't use the qualifiers educated workforce, because Nashua has a very educated workforce. And by the way, this isn't a Nashua issue. This is actually broader than Nashua. This is a regional issue. This is definitely not just a Nashua-centric thing. You need more population. You need to have more people living in this area, and by default, because of where we're blessed to be in New England, it's going to be an educated workforce. So attracting people to come into the community, I think, is very important. So maybe not so much the educated part, but just increasing the population will help you. Think of it from an economic developer's perspective. If I'm a site selector and I'm representing ABC Corporation out of Chicago, and they are looking for 100,000 square feet of space. They need to fill, they need 500 employees, but they need to be up and running within a year of the plant being built. So it's a 2.5 year exercise, from finding the site to constructing the site to them being up and running to meet their manufacturing or their commitments by their suppliers or their clients who they have POs with. They need to find 500 people. Can we today say that we have 500 people that would be able to actually backfill into those jobs that are able to meet that demand? So a site selector will automatically rule out certain areas based off of those types of situations.
Please.
If I might, Tim, would you say that if you're looking, or you're talking to a company interested in moving to Nashua, they've already addressed the power requirements and decided that the cost of energy is not important?
No, not correct.
You don't think they'd already made a decision that cost of power in New England is acceptable versus no?
No, I'm sorry, I don't know if you have more that you wanted to add, but I can tell you, I talked to site selectors and commercial real estate professionals very early on in the process. And my whole job is to try to get Nashua on the map as early as possible, and then to try to keep them on that short list. And just trying to take issues off the table. Just take issues off the table. So just as recently as a couple weeks back, I had a friend who's a commercial broker out of Boston call me up and say, I have a client that's looking for 120,000 square feet, new construction. We may go outside of Massachusetts. We're looking in New England. What do you got? We need 20 acres of land. And then they also said, what's your average per kilowatt hour? Because we're going to be comparing it. And it was... And it was, it's very important. They need to know those data points, because they're making those site assessments.
But their site assessment was already regionalized.
What's that?
Their site assessment was already regionalized, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, they were looking in this area. But if you're looking at a major corporation coming out of Georgia, they've probably addressed in their own mind what's acceptable for power.
And maybe not, no. I mean,
Okay.
and the reason why is because it's not just one variable-driven type of decision-making. Yes, power may be incredibly important. Great example, Dell EMC. Power is a #1 issue for them, but they still stay in New England. They spend over $1 billion a year on electricity. But to them, the more critical part is having an educated workforce, so they are willing to do that, because on their balance sheet, they spend more on talent than they actually do on energy. So it's many different variables in the formula that gets weighted.
I think those things help us in deciding what the resources are necessary for supporting economic development.
Well, you can't necessarily identify a specific shortfall that would keep companies from moving here, because a shortfall for one company is not necessarily a shortfall.
Suggesting shortfalls, I was looking at what are the drivers that you need, educated workforce. We can't do anything about some of the others, but educated workforce we can. A livable community, we can do things about.
Well, if I may, with respect to economic development, you know, we have a small community out here in the city called at Nashua Airport, and it's a community, it really is. And we are aggressively trying to bring businesses to Nashua Airport. And we have not been as successful as I think we would like to be, primarily because of some of the little sticky things that get in our way, like taxes. And believe it or not, we are at a tax disadvantage to Massachusetts. And we are leading a fight at the State House to change that. And if we do it, we're going to see a major change happening at our airport. You're going to see businesses coming here because of that. Right now, for example, we have an aircraft out there that pays a little over $150,000 a year New Hampshire state registration fees. If they moved the plane to Bedford, they would pay $300.
Bedford, Massachusetts.
Bedford, Mass, $300. So over a 10-year period, they would spend $3 million in taxes in New Hampshire, and they would spend $3,000 in Massachusetts. So it's not it's a no-brainer where they're going to go. Nashua's got a lot of good stuff going for it. It's in Money Magazine. It's one of the top cities in the country to live. I picked it. I came here with Money Magazine in my hand, right from Europe, looked at the downtown, fell in love with it, and moved here, and I've been here ever since. We've got a lot going for us, and we need to attack those little ankle biters that cause this company to not want to come here because that's their main ingredient. And I think we need to be able to address that. Okay, here's how we can perhaps fix it for you in a year or so.
Another one, you mentioned company looking for 20 acres of land. Do we have land available for someone like that?
At the airport, right?
We do. A little loud, but
So if I may, we do have some areas that would be appropriate, but they're challenging sites to develop. So even with the availability of the land, you still then have other issues. Some are brownfield sites. You know, some of them are challenged with lack of access. So that's where, from an economic development perspective, what can we do to position ourselves to give us the best, to put our best foot forward, so we possibly level the playing field so we can be competitive. That's the best way to use your resources, so you can hopefully have that competitive advantage moving forward. So maybe it is building a road, maybe it is giving creative financial terms to a developer, so they can clean up a brownfield site, so you can be able to use the land appropriately and bring it back on the tax rolls. Those are great ways to use limited scarce resources in an effective way for your benefit.
If I can kind of summarize what I hear then, different companies will have different issues. So someone might need land, or someone might need access, someone might need educated workforce, someone might just need more people in general. And if we're going to, it's gonna be hard, I can imagine it being hard for us on the infrastructure committee, for instance, to be thinking, well, what should we do about X that's gonna contribute the most to economic development if the requirements are so varied? And, you know, one guy's looking for land and the population is fine, someone else is just gonna rent an existing building and he needs educated workforce.
So if I may, I would just suggest, this is a great exercise, but I don't think it should be an economic development centric exercise. I think in and of itself, I think we as a community should have our own economic development plan. In fact, you're gonna be seeing that as a recommendation that I'll be making probably during the budget process, just a little hint. Because to your point, we actually need to have that type of conversation so we can learn where our strengths are and learn how to harness those strengths to our benefit, identify where maybe we need to put a little bit more attention and resources in so we can strengthen where we have a weakness to create those opportunities. In this instance, I suggest that we all, I think, can agree that economic development is going to be an overriding priority. I think that is probably the good takeaway that we take from this exercise. And we do that for some of the other issues that we see here to help inform us as we're doing decision-making moving forward.
Right. And Kim, I know you wanted to say something.
Yeah, so, I mean, to some point, there are things that the city is not gonna necessarily have any control over. So, having been in manufacturing for many years, just a tad bit up the road, our plant, and we were a worldwide company, was constantly being evaluated. And they kept a short list of, you know, what to close, and what to keep. And one of the things that always weighed against New England was you have high distribution costs, so you have high freight costs of getting your product out.
Right.
You can't do anything about that. New England's New England, it's where it is. But we had lower labor costs here than in other areas of the country, so it kind of balanced itself out. When it became a problem was when we could no longer find that labor force. Because now the lower labor cost doesn't necessarily help you if you can't find the people to put at the machines. So focus your, you know, area of emphasis more on that. There's gonna be lots of items that you can't possibly control. And we're in a mill right along the river of Manchester, 3 floors, which if you're in manufacturing is not the model anymore. Manufacturers go flat,
Single story.
but we owned it. So it was cheap and it worked. So you're always gonna have those constant trade-offs and you never really know when they're gonna take a bite of the apple. But I think we just need to focus on the ones that we really can deliver, and that's delivering the people that they have for their workforce. And it doesn't necessarily mean that those people have to live within the city, but they have to have easy access to get into the city. And that's not one thing that we have here in Nashua. That means things like rail and other things. Can the workforce that doesn't live here get here easily?
Any other thoughts?
Just a question for Tim, so this all fits with what you're thinking for economic development, kind of funnels into it
Sure, absolutely,
comfortably?
absolutely, without question.
Because I don't think anyone disagrees that the economic development is the engine that drives all this,
It's
because,
the fuel,
right.
yeah, absolutely.
I would just make a comment again, and Tim, you can fill in, since we both heard this presentation. When we were listening to what had happened in Rochester, New Hampshire, you know, Rochester was pretty depressed, and the housing stock that was there wasn't really great. And so with the growth of this company, one of the things that happened was they also brought people in from other parts of the world to work in this company. So there became a need for housing, and a different type of housing. And it's, you know, started to change the businesses there, because, you know, they brought people over from France. And so here they are, plunked down in Rochester, New Hampshire. How do you do your grocery shopping? You know, what are you looking for? So those sorts of things when you bring people in. And I know when we moved here 22 years ago, we were living in Baltimore, 10 minutes from my front door to the Inner Harbor. And I know a realtor said to me, I sat at the Inner Harbor having lunch going, how am I going to get these people to leave here to come to Nashua? So it's also the whole package. It's city arts. It's, you know, people were saying to us, hey, it's a family-friendly place. We've got good parks. We've got bitty basketball. You know, we have all these family-friendly things. So it's really a whole package, because you could have a great workforce here and things start going in a direction where they just don't feel they have the amenities to come home to, or within easy access if they don't live here. But this is kind of their hub. And they want to be able to come here to, I don't know, buy jewelry, buy clothing, buy a meal, go out with a friend on a Saturday afternoon, whatever. It's a whole package people are looking at. And, you know, I think we all know when you go into major cities, you see their major companies support their symphonies and their zoos and, you know, their baseball teams and all of those things, because it's a way to keep their employees happy.
That's right.
And that's really important too. So do we want to look at maybe trying to put some of these together? Are people comfortable with it, Tim?
I just want to clarify one thing. Commissioner Ackerman, do you want to add DPW into this, or I didn't know?
Thank you, Tim. I haven't been, this is my first look
Okay.
at this. It'd be nice if I could take this back and collaborate with Commissioner Bergeron and the other commissioners.
So what I could do then is I can save it like this and then create a new document, and we could, I guess, have two going, and then at some point in the future, maybe
We'll
meld them. Yeah.
consolidate them, yeah. Could you read us the numbers from the bottom, the new numbers,
Yes.
please?
So, again, the average.
Yes.
Education, 4.0. Public safety, 2.9. Long-term financial planning, 5.7. Efficiency, 7.3. HR labor, 9.3. Library, 10.3. Natural resources, 11.0. Complete streets, 6.8. Land use, 9.3. Economic development, 2.1. Right-of-way infrastructure, 4.4. Public transportation, 10.2. Downtown, 5.9. City arts and culture, 8.7.
So,
Does the fact that some of the groups didn't rate any of these, does that skew that negatively at all, or up or down? Tim?
You are correct. So 2 points. One, some people who did not rate, that would be entered in as a 0, so it wouldn't necessarily affect it either way except for their not weighing in. But then secondly, some people voted the same figure twice. And so therefore, you just have to keep that in the back of your mind, that they decided that the column was so important that they wanted to assign a certain figure or weight to it.
Well, to answer your question, I would recommend that some of these, I don't know, what are we calling the top label?
we've just identified them as priority areas
Okay.
right now, so.
I would say that there is some consolidation doable here. And that might be, You're charged to come back with a recommendation to consolidate what to what?
Well, I would rather that came from all of you.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
As
that we-
homework assignment.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering if we want to take a stab at it this evening, though. And I think public safety, economic development, education, right-of-way infrastructure, are those the top four?
Safety came out
Economic development.
better. Economic
Safety.
development's still one.
So you got economic development.
Education.
Number 2 was public safety. Number 3 was long-term financial, wasn't it? No.
No. Infrastructure.
3 is education,
4 is
4 is
infrastructure.
infrastructure,
Infrastructure,
and looks like 5 is
long-term
Or
planning.
planning.
long-term financial planning.
Right, yeah.
As you do that, and as you think about combining, what then do you give it as a ranking from all the different groups? I still struggle with how you're gonna start combining groups, and then how do you rank them? Are we gonna rank them from the average of the, together?
What we would do is, or what I'm envisioning, and Director Cummings and everyone else chime in, I was envisioning taking these 5 areas, and if we think those are 5 solid standalone areas, we can put them up on a sheet of paper here and just look at what of these other groups, the 9 that are left,
Could fit under.
could fit under them. Director Cummings is keeping the page that we have, so we can always get other additional input and change rankings. But then at least when you go back to your groups, you'll have 2 working documents, and we can get reflection on both.
We talked about the Venn diagrams, you know?
Right,
And this is I think we're getting to, if not doing a Venn diagram, structuring the guts of a Venn diagram. But if you look at some of these, for example, public safety, the DPW aspects of streets and infrastructure has an effect on public safety. But it also has an effect on economic development.
Right.
So that rolling it into
I don't know who they,
rolling it into one, that was even worse.
and as if we put these together and decide to roll some in together, this is not carved in stone. I mean, we're revisiting this. So as representatives of your group, this is not something we're envisioning being carved in stone. Do we have markers, Tim?
Nope, not here. I could go downstairs and grab a couple.
Okay. Do you mind?
Nope.
Because usually I have a Sharpie in my purse, but I don't even have that today.
How many, are you looking for one?
Or, you know what, why don't you get 1 marker and maybe a pad of Post-its? And what if we put these 5 areas up there, and then people can put what they think will go under them? Or if you think we should do something different, let's just all think about it. How about if we recess for about 5 minutes while Tim runs, and we'll come back. our top priorities or roll it in as we had talked about. So we'll have that discussion first. Okay, we are back, live, sorry about that. So we had identified public safety, economic development, education, right-of-way infrastructure, and financial planning as the top 5 in terms of our rankings. So what we had thought we would do is put what we see as the top 4 or 5 priority areas up on the board. And then Director Cummings has brought us some Post-it notes. You can use whichever color you like or all of the colors. And then maybe we can figure out which of these other areas we would like to put under those priorities. And my question to us before we write what we think our major priorities are is, do we want education to be a standalone, or do we see it as coming under economic development? And just keeping the 4 priorities, or sliding something else in as a 5th?
Remembering that this is not the school department.
Right,
This is education as a global concept.
right, right. Yes, Alderman Schoenman.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's a good point,
Right.
because we are taking a larger picture view. And same with infrastructure. It doesn't mean infrastructure committee, it just means that it has an element
Right.
that is based on bricks and mortar. Question about education is a good one.
Director Cummings had.
I have a recommendation.
Yes.
I just want, it would be my recommendation that you leave it out as a separate category as
Sure.
of right now. And the reason being is because I think it would be an interesting conversation that this group has when you take it to the next level in terms of developing objectives.
Okay, that works. So do you want to put those 5 up there, and we can start looking at our areas and thinking about where you want to put your Post-it notes under those 5 areas. So they're education, public safety, long-term financial planning, economic development, and right-of-way infrastructure.
Post-its? No. Thought you were looking around for something.
Oh. And you said, some have this sticking out top and some have not.
So we can just go up there.
Yeah, just go up when you're finished.
Tim, how was South Africa?
Wonderful,
Was it?
beautiful country.
Yeah,
Highly recommend it.
really? Long ride,
Long ride,
yeah,
especially for me, it was a short trip.
yeah.
Yeah, who goes to South Africa for a long weekend?
What'd you do down there?
I had a wedding I had to go to.
Oh, wow, very cool. Never been there.
Yeah, beautiful country.
That's what I've heard.
It is a unique experience to be, I was literally sitting at a table like this, having lunch, outside on a patio, and as close as, the other table is from me, a baboon just walks by. It's like their version of a gray squirrel.
You've been down here on Main Street. I'm kidding. I hope the cameras weren't on. Uh-oh, uh-oh.
Weather was nice.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah,
Good.
thank you for asking.
That makes it worthwhile if you go and it rained. and,
Oh, yeah.
I was talking to someone who was doing some flying down there one time, and they said that they had to send a Jeep out to get the baboons off the runway.
Is that right?
As the planes were coming in, yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine that would slow you down when you come.
Oh, yeah, in a hurry.
They're trying to entice me to do some work in Calais, Maine, and they said, oh, you'll love it. The last time we were there, we got ready to take off, and there was a moose on the runway. We couldn't take off for 3 hours.
Where was it?
Oh, wow.
Calais, up in Maine.
Oh, wow.
Actually, they call, up there they call it callus.
Callus,
Yeah.
yes, Callus, yes. I was like, okay, so you're trying to encourage me to come up. You want me to sit on a plane for 3 hours?
Not if you're there.
Huh?
Not if you're there, it's
Oh, but on the other side of the big pond it is. Golly.
down east.
Yeah.
Are you gonna do it?
No, I didn't do it. They also wanted me to leave on Easter Sunday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I had 20 people coming for lunch.
Didn't work.
It was about 6 years ago.
This is Maine, home of the Machias Maroon.
The what?
Machias Maroon,
Yeah.
the ships.
Yep, blueberry country.
Yeah. I love it up there. You know what's an interesting city up there is Eastport. It's the farthest point east, and they have a 20-year economic development plan. And they actually, they were written up in Atlantic magazine. One of the people who writes for Atlantic magazine was right-wing Republican. I think they should remove this small town.
Okay, I guess we can talk about that.
And one of the things they do, because they're so far east, is they're the place where dairy cows from the US get shipped to Europe, because it's the shortest trip.
Oh,
So that's a
interesting.
business they're building.
Wow.
Okay, so, looks like we have lots of stuff under economic development and infrastructure, financial planning, and a few things under education. Oh, I didn't see the public safety.
No, I did, that's other.
That's, oh, it's other, okay, okay. So,
Looks like you have some more compiling to do, Tim.
well, let's see if we like what we have there.
Want me to read them?
Yeah, if you want to read them and, see what's there. And we had, just as a reminder, we had that initial discussion about downtown, and is it an entity in and of itself, and, you know, how do we want to present that? I know it's ended up, I believe most of downtown's ended up under economic development, but just something to keep in the back of your mind. Do we want to pull it out and move it into something as its own, even though ranking it didn't come out that way? So, Tim, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, moving from left to right, education. Under education, we have library, library, HR, labor, library.
Library, library, HR, labor, and library, okay.
Under public safety, we have nothing, it's left blank. Then under long-term financial planning, we have land use, HR, 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 efficiency, 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 HR, HR, and efficiency.
Just a little consensus showing up there.
Okay, economic development. Under economic development, we have complete streets, public transportation, land use, public transportation, land use, land use, land use, downtown, 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 land use, library, city arts culture, public transportation, city arts culture / library, public transportation, and downtown. Right-of-way infrastructure. Under right-of-way infrastructure, we have complete streets, natural resources, natural resources, natural resources again, public transportation, complete streets, library, downtown, complete streets, public export.
Transportation.
Okay, all right, public export, natural resources, complete streets. Then we have city arts, infrastructure, natural resources, infrastructure, streets, infrastructure, downtown, infrastructure, land use, infrastructure, public transportation, infrastructure. And then lastly, we have a new column, and this might be something we want to take a moment to discuss. That's why I kept it to the end. It looks like we have two Post-its that were put up here under the other column for under efficiency, remove, and under HR labor, remove.
Remove them from any of this?
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, efficiency should be a standard, not a goal.
Okay.
And everybody should have it as a standard. And what was the other one?
HR.
Labor?
HR, again, every place where a city works, every one of those categories has got human resources in it already.
Kim and then Paul and, did you, yeah.
So, I think I apologize, I think it's the accountant in me. Part of really good long-term financial planning is identifying areas where you think that you can get efficiencies and moving towards those. Also, part of that is your labor costs and realizing where they should be and working towards that, which is generally why you often see finance in some way, at least in the private sector, on negotiation teams and active within HR, if not in some companies overseeing HR. So I really see both of those categories under long-term financial planning and necessary to the financial well-being of the city.
I believe every department has an efficiency goal, but I think what we're looking at here is potentially efficiencies across departments, which, because of the silo operations, become very difficult for people to look at. And that's why I think we might want to keep efficiency. It's citywide efficiency, not just departmental efficiency.
Alderman Schoenman?
Thanks. I appreciate what Mr. Scheifel said, because every department does have it, and these things should be assumed. But from a functionality standpoint, I like what Kim had to say, because it does, from reading those lists, those magenta and the yellow stickers, those were almost all HR and efficiencies under long-term financial planning. And I think it just speaks to the importance of efficiency and good HR policies and control on expenses in long-term financial planning and long-term financial health. It's critical. And just because we have them there doesn't mean this is, now becomes the efficiency department. These aren't departments, these are things that we need to be thinking of that ought to be maybe in a strategic statement somewhere where we say, you know, we're gonna focus on maximum efficiency and, you know, all that sort of stuff. And clearly, I think we seem to think that has a huge impact on financial planning.
If we look at the HR labor portion, it's been 5 years since we have moved to specific language in all of the labor contracts relative to healthcare.
Healthcare, right?
And I think that's what we need to do in more areas, because we've got, I don't know how many labor organizations and CBAs, but they all have things that could be modified to be more consistent across the various contracts.
Any other comments, thoughts? I would just, in looking at efficiencies, one of the examples that in the original sheet with all of the little notes, the original Post-it notes, one of the things that was under there, which really, again, does reflect into long-term financial planning, is the consolidation at Public Works. And that was a discussion that was had at an earlier meeting, that was one thing that was put up there. And is it a project? Yeah, it is a project, but it is something in terms of long-term financial planning and looking at efficiencies across the city. And I know in PEDC, under HR labor, one of the things we talked about was this developing an effective and efficient city workforce. And not that we don't already have one, but understanding that it's something we need to financially plan for, because as new products are developed for paving the streets or doing whatever function you have in city government, we need to be training you so you are operating effectively and you have the skills to do what's required of you 5 years from now. And we have to anticipate that, and as we move forward, know that there's a certain part of training that goes through it to continue to maintain people. So I know that we had kind of looked at those under financial planning also. So with that being said, would you be willing to have those moved? Did we convince you?
Yeah.
So we'll take those out of other and move them into long-term planning. And why don't we go back to, under education, we had the library, and then we had one HR and labor was also there?
On the same sticky, HR labor.
HR labor, okay. And then the rest are all library?
Correct.
Okay. I don't know who had HR labor. Do we want to leave that there, or do we want to move it?
I think I put that there because I was thinking educating the right workforce for Tim's project.
Oh, okay,
So if you want to move it over, I'm fine with it. Maybe I misinterpreted what.
okay. Okay, I think when we put this area up, HR labor, if you look at the original one, you know, that we did, we were really talking to the city. We were talking about succession planning, the mayor's guidance for the collective bargaining agreements, renewing union contracts.
Sure.
So move that over into long-term financial planning. Okay, and I think the only thing we have under long-term financial planning that's not HR, labor, or efficiencies is a land use. Is there, I think one of the first stickies you read said land use.
Which column?
Under long-term financial planning?
Yes. You're correct. There was
Okay.
one,
I couldn't write as quickly as you spoke, so I wasn't sure. And I don't know if whoever put that there, do we want to keep that there or move it to economic development, or right away? Comments?
no, I'm be interested to see the group's thought process on this, because I
I-
can see both sides of it.
Right, and I think, just in looking at my other little tally marks, it looks like all of the other land use ones ended up in economic development. But that's not to say something differently. So,
So you want to think about moving land use to where?
under economic development. And typically, that's where all of the work at the city level around codes is, but I would like to hear your comment, because certainly there's something tied in with the tax base.
That's right. So all I could think of when I first heard land use, again, under long-term financial planning, my immediate thought was, that is very innovative in terms of, we derive our revenue, 80% of it off of the property tax base. So making sure that we have the right areas designated for commercial development, where we'll get a higher assessed value, is very, very strategic in terms of making sure you have a healthy long-term financial plan in place. Now, with that being said, that could be under economic development.
Right. So I just want us to review that. We don't have to move it, just to reflect on it. Shall we go on to economic development? It looks like I have a couple of complete streets, a few public transportation, land use downtown, a couple for the library, some city arts, and more transportation.
Correct. So we have, and then complete streets.
Right. So maybe we should be thinking about economic development and right-of-way infrastructure together, because there seems to be some overlap there. Complete streets, public transportation, natural resources, the library downtown, city arts. So any thoughts?
Maybe we divide it into three. Maybe there are three that come out of that rather than two,
Well, and
instead of trying to combine.
yeah, and I guess this is where we should probably have the conversation about downtown, because downtown's landed in both infrastructure and economic development. Do we want to pull it out on its own?
I would have no problem with that. I think it's a logical thing. I think
It's a special category.
right.
Okay, so,
I'd even go one step further, but I will hold my thought on another comment, another one.
okay, well, we'll pull, so Tim, why don't we pull the downtown ones out, and we can, where it was other, we can just make that downtown.
Okay.
So it looks like there's maybe 5 or 6 under economic development and one under right-of-way.
So we have two under right-of-way infrastructure that looks like they're hybrid, where they are two on one sticker. You have library downtown, and then you have downtown/infrastructure. So I'm assuming the infrastructure one just means this column. But downtown and library under the infrastructure column.
So,
I believe that's mine. I'm at a disadvantage here, I'm colorblind, so I don't know what,
oh,
I can't.
Okay. That's all the downtowns.
Okay, so we've pulled all the downtown out. Alderman Shoneman.
I would suggest that, I think there were some of the city arts in both columns too? Economic development and right-of-way infrastructure?
Yes,
Or would
city.
they have a preponderance in one or the other?
Nope, I would say there's a preponderance in economic development, but,
We might want to, maybe city arts and culture, if downtown is gonna be a separate category, maybe city arts and culture ought to be under downtown.
I agree.
I think so.
I also think, to that point, that I think you might want to think about putting natural resources into city arts and culture, because as you look to attract an educated workforce to work in here to develop the community, you also want to make sure we have the relaxation and recreation that, so I think they dovetail with one another.
Other thoughts? I'm looking at you because it's kind of an infrastructure.
Yeah, that's one of those things, it's sort of like the land use. You know, we had land use predominantly in one area, but we wanted to make sure that we recognized that it had an impact on long-term financial planning.
Right.
And the parks and the green spaces and rivers and all that certainly has a physical location aspect to it. But it has an appeal aspect that, like downtown does, where you want it to you know, be something that is able to attract people. So maybe there's a little bit of overlap there. The physical aspect of the parks, and, you know, think about boat ramps or things like that. I think that's a bricks and mortar infrastructure thing. But I like your suggestion about recognizing that it's part of what I think is an overall aesthetic that I think can attract people. You know, we're gonna be doing gonna be talking about the downtown Riverwalk area. That's a bricks and mortar project, but the idea is to create that aesthetic. So there's some overlap. And again, we're not talking about departments necessarily, we're talking about where we wanna think about these things. Maybe some of both.
Right, and I guess I'm sorry, Commissioner Ackerman, you had said, looking at it under downtown and city arts?
No, I was thinking, see, I think downtown is really the footprint of Nashua. I think, you know, everything else comes together, but I think downtown is extremely important. I think somebody else brought that up. But I do think city arts and culture, and I still feel strongly that natural resources should be part of that, because I don't think it's truly brick and mortar. I don't think it's putting up a building. I think it's really making sure we have an attractive feature for people to spend a lot of time on the weekend.
And I agree with that, and I guess from that perspective and thinking of the evolution of this, I think it was Alderman Cookson who suggested natural resources, because I think before that we had talked just about parks and recreation or something like that. But if you think about our conservation land that's throughout the city, and, you know, how we kind of market that to bring people into the city, I would wonder if making it very downtown specific, we think broader under economic development, because it's something that we use to support the quality of life in the city, and that we want to maintain it from that perspective, along with the bricks and mortar piece of it, because it's not just downtown.
I think
And it's one way to connect the downtown to the rest, isn't it? In a recreational way.
I believe so. I think
So
if you
if I-
put everything under economic development, you're putting everything under one particular umbrella, and you'll lose focus, to be honest.
That's Tim's plan.
no.
Well, let's, Tim, what are your thoughts?
I guess I would recommend, if you were going to want to combine two columns, and if it was the will of the group, I would suggest natural resources with city arts and culture, and you could break, or culture, breaking city arts and culture, and maybe just breaking culture out off of city arts to be with natural resources. City arts and downtown, I do think, are linked, without question.
And
But-
the other part of that, though, excuse me, is that we really are trying to promote the arts throughout the city. So we're like putting sculptures from the Sculpture Symposium throughout the city, and we're looking at, you know, other places where we can bring the arts. Kim?
So, I guess I see more the connection between city arts and the Parks and Recreation, because you're talking quality of life there. I don't necessarily relate those strictly with downtown.
Right.
They're all over our city. Many people have them within their own neighborhoods. So I don't necessarily see those two as downtown, but I do see them linked. Is it possible that they're their own category? I know we're trying to get away from more categories, but I don't know.
I mean, I would agree with you, and I think it speaks to that whole quality of life, be it you want the arts, you want outdoor recreation, you want both. I mean, it's all part of what I think we traditionally say is Nashua. You can have a fine meal and go to an art opening or go to the symphony, and the next day you can go canoeing on a
So,
river.
how about renaming that to City Arts, Culture, and Recreation?
Let's just put
Like it.
those, so we'll put those together and leave downtown as well.
So if I'm hearing it correctly, we'll create a new column, and it's going to be arts, culture,
Recreation.
and recreation. And that will have our city arts and culture, along with our,
Commissioner Ackerman, does that
Natural
meet your,
Absolutely,
okay,
I think so. Natural resources, right?
yeah, so it would be the natural resources, and we're gonna, yeah, arts, culture, and natural resources.
That move the library into there as well?
I would.
I would.
I like a library under education because going back to my esteemed colleague here, Paul, education is not, we're not talking public education. We're talking a bigger picture of making sure that we have a qualified workforce to fill jobs in the city of Nashua. So I see it driving potential task force with the local colleges beyond what we have today.
And I would just comment in referring back to this two-page sheet that Tim sent us after the first sticky note activity. Under the library, we're talking about making sure the library has a proper level of technology. And so I think those of us who have heard the library talk, it's about technology for them to do their job, to run the library, as well as technology to make resources available to the community, which I think really fits in with the education piece. Because the goals that came from the library were all about getting people downtown, making it easy for them to get downtown, and kind of economic development. Yeah,
But the
Commissioner-
library does an awful lot, in culture and entertainment activities, bands and things. So, you know, they're trying to drive culture as well.
Yeah.
I think
Right.
if you were to break it down into percentiles, education would be the smaller element of, well, I mean, every educational facility that we have has their library embedded in their facility. They certainly send people to our library for research, et cetera, and it offers an educational opportunity, but it's primarily culture, arts, and probably entertainment. I would say the preponderance of people who go to the library do so not necessarily for educational purposes.
Right,
That's not, you can certainly get an education there, but
yeah.
that would not be the driving force.
Yeah, and I'm not disagreeing with you in terms of the function of our library, but the reason, if you look at what people were referring to when they rated this as an importance, the library was defined as ensuring that they have the appropriate technology. And that's all so it wasn't necessarily the library as a service, someone just put it up there, and I can't remember who it was, but it was that they have technology to continue their mission.
Well, if that's the case, then library would fall into the category of efficiency.
And that may be the more appropriate place for it. I'm sorry, someone over here wanted to speak.
I will, I didn't say anything, but I think to your point, Paul, is that there are a lot of things at the library that are culturally contributory to the city. And that's what I find myself, I didn't realize it until you said that. Most of the stuff I do there are the presentations that they
Right.
have. And it's a wide variety, and there are a lot of interesting stuff.
And I think to that point, if arts, culture, and recreation or natural resources becomes, if that shakes out as one of the major priorities, then the library will be looking at that as they do budget planning. What's their role in that? How do they address that priority? So that would be their role. Again, I'm trying to kind of bring us back to what drove that label of library, and it was technology. I think all of us realize how important the library is, and, they're part of summer fun, and they're bringing in special speakers, and they provide a lot of opportunities outside of going and checking out a book for research. In fact, most of the time, it's recreational reading. But it's that technology piece that brought it up there.
But they also talked, in, I think, our first meeting, we had something about transportation for getting people to
Right.
the library.
Right.
And I think when they look at their summer events, they want to try to get people to those
Right.
events.
Right, and to use their library year-round.
Yep.
Just to make it more accessible, because there have been conversations about just that parking lot and how people get in and out of there. Yeah, most of they had, I think, 3 items originally, and it was really around downtown, getting people downtown, ease of movement around downtown. So we can leave that wherever and have a conversation when we take it back to our groups. But I just think it's important that as you reflect on what comes out of this meeting and the matrix that Director Cummings is going to has put together for us, you go back to this 2-page document with the columns that documents all the stickies originally. Director Cummings.
I just want to clarify that I have the right sticky notes in the right column. So we have a new column with arts, culture, and recreation, and in it we have city arts, culture, and we have natural resources, and I have library over here. Is that accurate, that library should be under this column?
If we want to leave it there for right now, and then we'll come back to it.
Okay. And then similarly, I just wanted to point out that I wanted to clarify, we have one double here, and I think this is supposed to be, just because I'm reading the other ones, I think this infrastructure downtown is supposed to be under downtown. I think you just labeled it as a column. So I think you meant downtown?
Right.
Okay, so you can, perfect, thank you.
We witnessed Bob make the change, not you.
Right. It's the camera
And
didn't
it's
get it.
captured.
Do you want me to repeat any? There's
Would you
still.
like to hear them all over again?
I think, maybe economic development and infrastructure. I think there's still some overlap between those two. I'm thinking about
Yeah.
public transportation, for instance.
So, and to that point, Alderman Schulman, economic development, you have complete streets, public transportation, land use, public transportation, land use, land use, land use, land use, public transportation, and public transportation. And then under right-of-way / infrastructure, you have complete streets, complete streets, complete streets, complete streets, public export, land use, public transportation, complete streets, public transportation. So there is some overlap.
Public
So there's a land use.
Public.
for transportation.
Oh, okay.
Trans-X.
Glad you said that. I'm going to note that this should
That's
be
quite all right,
public
please.
transportation.
It sounds to me like there's more, maybe you can help me there, Tim.
Yep.
Maybe it's really close. A few more public transportation under economic development than under infrastructure. Public transportation, to me, sounds like more an amenity or a service as opposed to just a station somewhere. And I think that infrastructure would deal with station aspect of it, but the service aspect of it sounds to me like it would be economic development, or if there was, or maybe even culture, although maybe economic development, community development kind of thing. What is the balance there?
So under economic development, public transportation comes in at 4. Under right-of-way and infrastructure, public transportation comes in at 3.
To me, it sounds a little more like economic development, but that's just because maybe where I put my sticker,
Yeah,
so.
yeah. I mean, I think, when I think about public transportation, I think about moving people and goods. And the efficiency of doing that is really part of the whole economic development thing. I have a piece of property I want to develop. Do you have a bus line out here? Other thoughts? Certainly the brick and mortar is,
I think about the public transportation being getting people to maybe where the jobs are. So that's part of economic development. And I'm not sure, I guess we have that shuttle that runs around town, and I'm not sure if that's getting any traffic?
we're working on revitalizing that.
Yeah.
What are your comments, Director Cummings?
I guess I would just ask that maybe you look back to the original column as to how you defined economic development and infrastructure. That might help.
Really?
You're a busy man.
Economic development.
Well, under public transportation, there's a comment that says public transportation.
Oh.
Now we get it somewhere.
Very deep.
But I think, when I think of public transportation, I do think of a service that's provided. And I like the point of that service being part of developing a piece of land somewhere, or moving a workforce around, moving people downtown for shopping or whatever. It sounds to me like predominantly development.
You could move mine over, fine.
Kim, any thoughts?
So the only reason I can see for having public transportation under infrastructure is saving on roads from less cars. I mean, I really have a hard time with that link. I see public transportation as part of economic development.
I look at, and I put it under infrastructure, but the more we talk about it, I look at it as, how do we get people from whatever corner of the community to where they need to work, or where they need to go for medical appointment? How do we do that effectively and efficiently, and cost efficiently? So,
Okay, that-
I think economic development is probably, I'm agreeing with,
I can see your point, though, like, why do we build a road from point A to B? It's to be
why do
able
we
to.
want public transportation? Yeah, we want to take the cars off, but we want to address the need of those that don't want to have a car.
Or can't afford one.
Well,
I
actually,
can't
can't
afford
afford one.
So the will of the group is, we have the 3 in infrastructure. Are we moving them? Yay, nay?
You can move mine, I have no problem.
Yeah, but it's not set in stone either.
No.
So if it's the will of the group, I'm moving them over to economic
3
development.
from public transportation over to economic development. The natural resources we took out. And then I would suggest the 1 complete street under economic development, we move with the other 6 under infrastructure.
So what's left under infrastructure there, Tim?
Complete streets and 1 land use.
What was that?
Land use?
Oh.
We have
said
1
one
land
land
use.
use.
We have 1 land use under long-term financial planning, and then we have 5 under economic development.
Mm-hmm.
And again, if you look back, that's looking at updating codes, codes to support residential and commercial development, a comprehensive review of city zoning to update land use, procurement, and revision of permitting code.
Seems to be the majority said it belongs in the other one. So I think maybe we want to move
To economic development,
Land use.
land use
To
to
economic
economic development.
Okay.
Is that yours?
No, but I'm just saying the preponderance of
Okay.
choice.
Is that is that what folks wanted? Yeah? Good.
Okay.
Complete streets is the entire category for right-of-way and infrastructure.
To change the title.
Under economic development, you have public transportation, land use. That's it.
That's it, yeah.
Under long-term financial planning, you have HR and efficiency. So again, that's HR labor and efficiency. Under education, you have library, and then we created 2 new columns. Arts, culture, and recreation, which has city arts, culture, natural resources, and library. 1 library.
Okay. And we'll just leave that there. And I think we've all had the discussion, and it'll be reflected in the minutes, so we can have that discussion with our groups and come back.
And then 1 special column for downtown, only recognizing downtown.
So is everyone comfortable with that? Okay, so, I say, if everyone is fine with it, well, now it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the 7 categories, the 7 priorities. And then, just as we did here, like, under education, library, 3. Public safety, there's nothing, it's just what's in the other one. Long-term financial planning, HR, however many ended up there, efficiencies, however many ended up there. And just give us a number.
So we went from 14 to what?
7.
To 7.
That's progress.
So, thank you all for your hard work, and, next time I'm gonna ask who drinks coffee, tea, or whatever, and I will bring some. And Director Cummings, thank you so much for sticking with us, and,
Absolutely.
We appreciate your input and your assistance. So, public comment, seeing none, any additional remarks?
I got a mark.
Yes.
This is the second meeting I've been to. I only came to one before, was larger setting. I think this exercise, and I don't want to call it just an exercise, I think this process we're going through is really good. We went through this with the airport not too long ago, and it became, and Tim was there, it became, we developed a statement out of it that we're now going to take to use to guide the decisions that are made at the airport. And having that laid out is really good. I think that this group here, the work that's done is really great. I'm here because Mark's not, but I'm going to see if I can come next time he is here. Because it's really good, and I think this helps us set direction where we want the city to be. What do we want Nashua to be? I look around other cities in New Hampshire, and they seem to, based on the things that I see, they have some kind of a plan set up. Look at Portsmouth, and they want to become this seacoast town. They're developing tourism. They're doing all this stuff. It seems that they're doing that according to a plan. In Manchester and Concord, you look at some of the same kinds of circumstances, and Nashua being as important an economic driver as it is for the state, and the proximity we have to the markets, all this sort of stuff, to have a plan that we can look back at and look to as we make decisions later is vital. So it's really great.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for letting me be here.
And I would just say this, well, does anyone else have a comment? I would just say this, I know, some people are here as the regular representative, some people are here as alternates. There's not a whole lot of voting that goes on, but I think the richness of people's different perspectives in the conversation is really important. So, Bob, if you want to come back, come back. I think that it's really important that we have these discussions here, and if there are two people from a commission or a board or the airport authority here, I think sometimes you could go back to your group and say, no, this is what was said, we both heard it, and you can, like, this is what I heard, right? You heard this too. So please, if, I welcome you coming, and if anyone else wants to come back, even though the regular representative is coming, you're more than welcome to join us. Just let Sue know so we make sure we have name tags and enough microphones and enough chairs, but otherwise you are more than welcome to participate. Do I have a motion?
Move to adjourn.
Move to adjourn. All in favor? Aye. Okay, and we are adjourned at 9:36. Again, thank you all so much for your time today.